Hello everyone, Fluff here. Today I'm going to be bringing you an Uzi guide covering both weapon and skill-based style of builds. I will break it up into two parts. First, I will show the relics for both builds and the skills for both builds appropriately. And then I'll cover the stuff that's more generic too, that works in everything, like toy workers. To start with, we're going to go over Uzi's relics for her skill build. So in a skill build, you've really seen this recently in a video that I put out. I ran Restraint, Giant's Deck, Crit Defender, and Bonus Coin. So Restraint will give us a lot of skill power when we do not fire our weapon. It'll give us 200%. Giant's Deck is going to give us a bunch of attack power, but also hurt us on skill use. This sounds kind of productive, but then it ties in nicely with Critical Defender. As with Critical Defender, when you're hurting yourself with Giant's Neck, you're going to be getting 10% crit per time you take damage, up to 5 times, so 50% in total. With your seasonal upgrades, this will be rounding you to around, I think, 65%. That's really nice for starting with. A bonus coin is just going to give us more money to help us scale through the runs. There's obviously going to be better options out there. This is just a fun variant where you just rely only on skills. There are going to be some variants where you'll be able to drop the restraint in favor of something like status effect target and work in either weapon or skill depending on what you find, but I like to either focus on either skill or either weapon, as being great at one thing is better than being mediocre at two things. I hope that makes sense. But with that being said, this all ties in nicely, as this is going to give us a strong start with our baseline stats. So we're going to have a lot of skill power and a bit of attack power, which with Uzi has some of the highest base attack power in game, along with lightning. So you don't need to really work too hard to get that scaled up. A couple percentage scaling attack power things here or there, and you're going to be set. Getting 65% crit through Crit Defender is really nice, and it makes it easier to cap that out as well. Being a archetype that can't have access to something like the Crasher, or have a skill that gives you 100% crit, it's nice to be able to just get there as early as possible, as it'll be a major boon to your early damage. Moving on over to the drop rate relics to kind of show what sort of things we're going to be looking for. So again, with this sort of setup, I'm not looking to fire my weapon, so I'm kind of just avoiding anything that will require me to do so. So this means having no attack speed relics, for example, since it's a skill build. Reactors are fine, as your main skill, the Phoenix Wings, actually hits multiple times, so it procs them more efficiently than you might expect. But to start with, we have our skill power based relics. We should technically put conversion module up here, but I'm just too lazy to move it right now. So yeah, we got skill power relics, and we've got some crit damage relics, as we're going to be able to hit that crit chance cap really early. We've got our global multipliers with stuff like Goldtooth. Weak Spot can fit into this as well as just other things that just scale your global multipliers up, like status effect target, for example, over here. Then we've got some things to increase our attack powers. We want to find stuff like Medal of Growth if you're doing seasonal. You want to find things like Medal of Honor. And then Retail is just going to give you a bunch of attack power once you find certain upgrades, like the Phoenix Wings Dash upgrade, which gives you 200% defense on use. We got our Reactors again. This will scale into our status effect target. Uzi innately comes with Freeze, so we don't need a Freeze Reactor, but Shock is always going to be a nice benefit. Being a breaker that doesn't have a defense shred, Shock will give us some defense shred. Again, because Uzi doesn't actually struggle that much with applying statuses with Reactors. Bleed Reactor is actually fine to get, and you can really make use of this with Phoenix Dash as well as Frozen Pulse. In general, it's just hits, so it doesn't have to be from a weapon, it's just all your attacks. So this even means things like Uzi's bubble that she could put down, her big dome. This actually ticks really fast, doing damage to anything caught inside it, doing 1 damage per tick, which isn't much, but when you account for the fact that it's doing 1 damage per tick, your Phoenix Wings hitting as well, these are a lot of minor hits happening all at once, which will give you these reactor procs really efficiently. Then, because it's a skill build, we have stuff like our cooldowns and more attack power. This is just generic stuff that you generally want to be looking for in any breaker when you're playing a skill build. Things that we're going to be avoiding are obviously things like categories, as these just, it's a skill build, we don't want weapon power, we're not going to be firing our weapon. Things like charging defense is not bad, but in the content that we tend to run, these won't appear. Extra ammo unit device is a trap. this looks good on face value to people, but the fact it gives immunity to all status effects means you're not going to be able to proc your crit defenders, and yes, this also means the upgrades where you gain immunity to all statuses do this as well, but there's ways to play around that by pre-stacking before you use Phoenix Wings and then going in and using it. But in the scenarios where you just have this stops any form of pre-stacking and really harms you in the long run, and this includes stuff like Toast, who needs to pre-stack as well. Status effect duration decrease, it's useless. Statuses are rarely going to be a thing that kills you in this game, and if they are, that's because you severely misplayed, and instead of trying to build around having ways to avoid that happen, you should just be trying to avoid the scenario in general. So if there's a fire puddle on the ground, for example, try not to position yourself in a way where you're going to run into it. Hades gear, if that laser beam's coming around, it's going to set you on fire. Like, just time your perfect dodges, learn the patterns, and learn to avoid these so you don't have to waste money sinking into these mundane relics that are just a cost sink, don't actually help you clear. Defense suit versus attack isn't bad, it's a good option, but again, retail suit being a breaker that can keep their uptime on their 200% defense upgrade quite efficiently, you would prefer to see this than never to have the opportunity to take this. And then obviously weapon power relics are all on here as well. Moving over to skills, I personally decide to start with the double projectiles, as I feel a major damage drop off when playing a skill build Uzi if I never see this upgrade in comparison to any of the other upgrades. You can see I also have this board as well, as I was messing around with this to begin with as well. This isn't bad in a weapon build. Like, we could take this in a weapon build, but there is a better option which I'll cover when we come to the weapon build. But in general, for a skill build, you want to find every single one of these upgrades. There is not a single upgrade for Phoenix Wings that is bad. It's just in order of terms of which ones you want to see first. It would be the double projectiles, so we take that first. Then you really want to see the damage in melee range, and also the damage to frozen targets. These are both 100% multipliers, and really strong in their own rights. Technically, the melee range one is going to be more used to you due to things like Arctic gear and Ocean Mammoths being ice planets and being immune to freeze. You won't be able to really utilize the freeze target one as often. So we opt to take this over the freeze target one if you ever given that as an option, so either or in a sense. And then the immunity device one, and obviously cooldown. All of these are good options. Now, you've probably seen in my tier list video before where I've said Uzi's damage isn't great. That is still true, but it doesn't mean that she can't do damage and she can't clear. So in a best case scenario, you want to get all these Phoenix Wing upgrades, and then when it comes to Frozen Shock, this Frozen Shock upgrade, where it stacks skill power on use up to 10 times for 10 seconds, this is really easy to maintain, especially when you find your charger modules in your run, as this will mean you're not finding your weapon anyway in a skill build, and charge modules going to constantly be reducing your cooldown, so you're going to be spamming this, keeping the uptime of this 100% skill power all the time, so this is really strong. And then you're going to find things like freeze duration and skill power. Now, if you combine both of these together, you've got 150% skill power for using Shockwave, whilst having your Shockwave last longer. Your Frozen Shock, sorry, last longer. The increased damage AoE, it's not needed. It's nice if you're fighting something like double machine commanders and they get a few bots out here and there. It increases the AoE read radius, so you're more likely to catch everything and pull them into the middle. The 300% skill power, again, this doesn't hit too hard. It's still damage you otherwise wouldn't have, so I would still take this over the perfect dodge options, for example. But I will get onto that in a second, as that's our next important thing for our skill build. Uzi has an upgrade where it increases her teleport damage by 500%. This, on face value, sounds kind of troll and kind of like a griefing playstyle, but if you go back and watch the clear that I did, you'll see that the teleport does big damage and honestly rivals that damage of the burst of Phoenix Wings. You're going to be spamming Phoenix Wings and spamming your dash back and forth on top of enemies, and this will accumulate a lot of uptime for you. So, in that same vein, finding any of these upgrades where it says increase the number of uses, these become highly valuable once you have this bait damage. In fact, you can argue that starting the bait damage could end up being better in something like a seasonal run in terms of your overall scaling, as it will give you more early game damage, but coming from just a consistency play style and a consistency standpoint, you're going to gain more damage through Phoenix Wings in the long term by how many upgrades can give you damage in comparison to teleport. But for once in this game, there's a breaker that could utilize dash upgrades and actually gain DPS from it in a perfect scenario. Now, coming over to the bubble, the only bubble upgrade we really care about is the 50% attack power to allies inside the AoE radius. And the, when I find it again, sorry, the increased size. The increased size is going to help us block more projectiles and have more room to work with to keep that attack power. The rest of it, in a skill build, doesn't matter. I'm going to jump over now into the next clip where I'm going to start talking about the weapon power stuff. Now that we're back into it, this is the weapon power variant. I have a couple of different ways you could technically build her for a weapon power, but this is what I found to be the most consistent and less awkward to play around. So we're going to come back in with the same combo of the Giant Snag Crit Defender combo of being able to maintain your crit chance really early into the run. This is crucial when you're playing a character like Uzi. And then we're going to go with the tried and true infinite mag single shot combo. This means that you're never going to have to reload, you're going to have 100% uptime on your weapons whenever you are using them. Your magazine capacity is going to be fixed to 1, so things like critical power magazine and stuff will just always work anyway, and you won't have to worry about dropping ammo because you have infinite mag. Coming over to the relic drop rates, now things are going to look similar, but we're just basically swapping out the skill power stuff for weapon power stuff. So we've got fat rounds is what we call them, and then you've got your Exium rounds for more weapon power, and then you've got your standalone critical damage stuff, more multipliers, more attack power, your relics. These are a little bit easier to maintain in a weapon power build as you're going to have more uptime on them, and then mercy. Other things to really note, and there's not enough room up here to really fit them in, but things that you can also pick up would be things like cannon greaves. These aren't bad. They're a little awkward to play around if you're not used to them, but they're really good when you do get used to playing around them. So there's a chance that picking this up instead of single shot mag can be good. Then you pick up either or, like either single shot mag or cannon greaves in your runs if you're doing seasonal. Same as turret greaves. To really cement in that playstyle of standing still, this is perfect, as Uzi has a lot of mobility and a lot of iframes on her abilities. These all help with just further bolstering your damage. So if you're in for a challenge of working out and learning to play that sort of playstyle, things like cannon greaves and turret greaves are a great addition and will bolster your damage massively throughout a run and really spike you up. Other things that are really good to know, and I should have covered this in the skill power part as well, but things like critical greaves, going to be dashing around a lot. Uzi's best asset is that she's nimble, she's very fast, she can get around places much faster than other breakers and avoid damage much easier than other breakers. You just got to be careful that you don't end up overshooting or getting too hyperactive with your movement and putting yourself in bad situations by accident, which makes critical greaves very easy to maintain for her, as her dash cooldown is extremely fast. It's faster than lightning's. Dodge greaves, this is something that we're not really going to want. The whole no damage taken part is immediately thrown out the window when you think about the fact that we have Giant's Neck. We're going to have what's it called? We're going to be hurting ourselves a lot to keep our crit defenders up, which means this 5-second window of having 25% crit chance, it's only going to actually be around about like a 1 second to 2 second window, and really it's not going to be worth it when you think about how long some of these fights are going to be as an Uzi. Other additions that will be great to consider are things like the crit chance shield and the critical power shield, as well as the status effect shield. These are very cheap, very easy to find in your runs, and you can pick these up even in a skill build as well, but really shine in a weapon build. The weapon amplification shield isn't terrible, but you don't really have a great way of maintaining a shield. And that's really it for the weapon variant. Going over skills now, the only things that are really going to change is we want to start with our 50% attack power bubble. We, as I said before, as Uzi with weapons, we're going to be planting ourselves basically and trying to do as much damage in a solitary area as possible, and really unloading in that area. So basically play within your bubble. Giving you 50% extra of your baseline 250 means you're going to be gaining 125 attack power just for standing in your bubble. This is a lot of damage if you compare it to the 50% weapon power. But in that vein, Uzi doesn't have very many weapon power related buffs, and this is a problem, as this is where her identity crisis begins. She does alright damage as skill power, but her weapon power build is very reliant on finding certain things in your run to bolster your attack speed or have a Shuri active with you. You need infinite mag, but you also need things like status effect target to really get your damage going. And then you the weapon choices that you have as well, and I'll cover that in a second, are very narrow, and you only really have 2 options. So back to skills, you need your 50% power shield for on your bubble, so this is what we start with. Other things you really want to find is the increase AoE radius so you can stay within this as much as possible, as well as the cooldown. The cooldown will be very nice as this means more uptime on it. Then we want the Phoenix Wing upgrade that gives us weapon power. The immunity effects again is kind of a downside, but that only lasts for 5 seconds and really isn't that big of an issue, as you'll be able to restack crit defender quite easily as you're going to take damage as Uzi eventually. Then we really want to find like these upgrades really don't matter. The extra dodges are nice, keeps you safe, but you don't want any of these really. Perfectly dodging as Uzi is not something really you're going to be doing that often. As well as these Frozen Pulse upgrades, you only really want your increased AoE duration. The skill power, again, not really that important, but being able to keep enemies locked down and have more uptime on your freeze is always a positive when you consider things like status effect target. But yes, that's how limited she is in weapon power buffs. Your only real options are a 50% bubble and a 50% weapon power, and then 100% on a perfect dodge, which you're likely never going to utilize, as the best time for you to burst is when the enemy is going to be CC'd, so you're not going to be able to proc this before CCing without having some weird overlaps happen with bad transitions, which is where most of your damages are going to drop, and it makes your damage look a lot worse. I hope that wasn't too rambly. I'm now going to move on to Toy Workers. Before we get over to Toy Workers, I forgot to interject. Weapons for Uzi in a skill build really don't matter. You're pretty much just going to pick up whatever weapon has the best rolled stats on it, so something with high skill power or attack power, or even crit damage, all are good. But in a weapon build, you only have 2 real options. Assault handguns are by far your best option. If you can get a really good pair of assault handguns, they're going to take you really far. They are going to have the most DPS for you, and they are also going to have the most burst for you. Nothing here really holds a candle to them, apart from burning scatter pistols. These can be really powerful. When you find a really good pair of them, you get a high amount of attack speed, a high amount of weapon damage, and a high amount of like crit damage and stuff on these. They can really tear through enemies. They'll kind of destroy your eardrums with how loud they can be sometimes when you're really going at a boss, but for the most part, you can't go wrong with a good pair of assault. Like, these need to be really good for them to really compete, but you can't go wrong with a really good pair of assault handguns or an extremely good pair of burning scatter pistols. Much like every breaker, you only really have 2 Toy Workers as a option. So you have your Gold Hound. This is perfect for those runs where you have multiple planets, so if you're going into something like a seasonal run, take your Gold Hound. This is going to scale you through the run much easier and make your run and your life much less complicated. If you're doing something like Extreme or Campanella Normal, on the other hand, you'll have Medic V2. This is a great starting Toy Worker for people, as this is going to give you a lot of early game damage, and that's usually where a lot of breakers struggle, is getting your early game damage rolling. If you can survive the early game in a lot of your runs, your mid to late game of your run is going to be much smoother, as you're going to have time to ramp up into it. The safety net of having extra healing is also nice. This will save your life in some scenarios, but mostly it would basically just keep you topped up for when you find stuff like Mercy and counteract the giant snake damage. That's the main use of this. But nonetheless, these are the only real 2 options you have. I can cover extensively why these are all bad options, but to dial it all down to being, in the simplest terms, these Toy Workers at the top really do not give high enough stat increases for them to ever compete with the raw stats you're going to be getting from Gold Hound from the extra relics you buy, or the extra attack power you're going to have from Medic V2. And High V2, the attack power you gain is very small in comparison to the Medic V2's attack power, but the shield can be useful if you're utilizing a lot of these relics which have prerequisite of having a shield active. Those are the only real times that these come into play, but with seasonal upgrades and other relics that you can find in your run, those would be a better option than just taking High V2, so you could end up just taking one of these 2. Gold Rich can be good for if you're trying to get your first ever clear in Campanella Normal, as having extra 50 at the first planet, along with the 100 resources from your seasonal upgrade tree, will allow you to be able to buy a tier 2 weapon instantly if you see a good one, or even save and get a tier 3 weapon after the first fight. It can be a game changer once you have this going. I hope this has been helpful. Let me know any questions below. I could try and enlighten you. If not, just refer back to the previous video where I played Uzi with the skill variant that I showed you originally, and hopefully that will answer anything you need.